Well, here we push into turn 5 on the Pleasant Hill scenario now. Of course, I managed to forget because I went to sleep. My kind of concept of, well, maybe I should pay attention to these. And we see Bagby almost breaking, leading this charge here. It's too good a position to give up, probably, but oh man, you know, your unit becomes so crappy once it's brigade combat ineffective that in a sense, pulling it back before it hits that to save the victory points just makes sense. And I feel like I oops there, but I need the extra troops and I don't know what to do. We got the Confederate, and well, my nature took hold and it attacked, and this is why these games are always bloodier than they should be. I think if you play carefully and pay attention to the BCE charts, the casualty numbers stay kind of reasonable, but I always get about twice as many casualties as I should because I just grind them in. And it's not like the other guy's not going to take BCE as well because you're fighting harder across the board. It's just, if you have the choice of what to withhold, you can improve your victory conditions, and probably if both people are doing that, the casualties will go way down because the size of the battle decreases as the units tire out. Anyway, the Confeds reserves are released and start marching down. Meanwhile, some other troops marched over to take the gun lines. Now you can see they got kind of driven out, but they also cut some holes in Dwight's unit. They're punching through here in the center. A few melee choices, like here where I had some pinned guns, couldn't do it. The numbers just don't add up. And then across here, there's a restriction in the system that I remembered but wanted to make sure of on this. Which is, if you fire at one unit, you can't melee a different unit. So some of these guys shot the Union units and created a hole, and it would have been great with that added weight and power to throw it in and maybe win some of these melees here. Just the way that I split up my fire, etc., made that impossible. So I wasn't allowed to I wasn't able to melee at an advantage that seemed worthwhile. So I held off there. Well, we'll be hitting into the Union turn, that's why I use these dice here. And onward. Okay, as we push to the 6 o'clock turn, and this is where the Union can start paying victory points to bring the units in that are in the background. Well, the Union's largely driven back the Confederate advance here. They've put a bit of fire here, continue putting their pieces on the line. They don't really want to stay there because that's too scary. They're going to get outflanked. There's nothing to defend back here, so they're going to try to pull behind that river, but they had a pinned unit, so they had to bolster their line, and that's one of the problems in the game. You could abandon a unit, but I know for me, it's often very difficult to do that. I just want to throw my troops in to help extricate it gracefully, but it'll rout, it'll just take some more losses if you don't, and I often cost myself a lot by doing that. Up here we actually saw the Union do a melee attack to drive units back. They did another one over here, pushing, some of that back. And both sides have kind of some seriously iffy units, like 2 morale units. It's not quite as bad as some of the stuff at Pea Ridge, but this is not, again, necessarily entirely a professional army here on either side. There are some good units, though, there's no question about that. You can see the Union has a lot of 4-point units. The artillery's professional, there's no question there either. Here's a 5 morale unit. Anyway, where you see that effect, that's a, there's a big swing when there's a difference in quality of troops in this game, because the crappy stuff just runs. It can't stand up to the fight. The stuff you see running is probably not too good. It doesn't look good for the Confederates to me. If I was pursuing this attack and really had a choice at this point, I would be ordering my troops to slow down here. I don't see any advantage for them. I don't think they're going to gain any traction. The first initial surprise was one thing, but in a game like this, you don't really have that option. You can't just withdraw and say, hey, I'm done, because there is a tactical victory point value to the hexes, etc., and you are going to lose the battle if you don't engage more decisively. Strategically, though, there's not much reason for the Confederates to attack here. Their very position here is enough to probably force the Union to fall back. Even though they lost the historical battle, the Union still had to fall back. Not so much because of casualties, but because their position was untenable without the boats to support them. Alright, on to that next turn. Okay, so we finished the Confederate side of the 6 o'clock turn. And, well, they're beginning to put some pressure on. Now, they pushed up here against the hill again, and Bagby or whatever, brigade effectiveness broke, and his whole unit ran back. This game has an interesting effect, which is once you have a unit broken like that, a whole brigade, they don't just recover. So you got to actually roll for them. In this case, I think everything succeeded. But that's not that likely, so you really don't want to keep pressing with these damaged units. You know, I mean, I kind of didn't want to go in here, but I just couldn't resist it because it's such a good attack. I've shifted the Confederates over. They did manage to wreck Lynch over here, and he's, I think, getting pretty close himself to falling apart. Over here we're shooting down the trench. I didn't want to make a close combat there. Lynch was the only assault that was made. Over here, not really good odds for melee, so I keep moving into attack. Missed this pin marker, and these slippery counters are just a bitch and a half. Anyway, we got the Confederate column coming down this way, another unit along the other side in line formation heading down, really making Dwight's position look untenable. Breaking in here on the hill, that throws chaos into the line. I mean, we've got Union units here, we've got the Confederates pushing in. This is what I'm used to from Terrible Swift Sword that doesn't happen so much in Thunder and the Crossroads. Some of it may be the regimental versus brigade level, but you got units running up and making these flanking attacks all over the place. It's just very difficult in this series to hold territory, and it ends up kind of turning into this odd, chaotic, troops swinging around, grabbing flank attacks on one another. It has something to do with being able to, you know, make that first shot, that bonus flank attack, and then, yeah, you might suffer one, but it's to your advantage to get the first one in, and then you want to get the next one in as well. And it largely has to do with the fact that there are no orders. You can take these opportunity actions and just run out and go do something. You know, what would the Confederate orders have been here? Well, they initially started in this direction and then swung over this way kind of on a dime. And that's part of the problem here, is that you just have too much control over your units. They don't have to maintain any kind of real formation. It's one of the flaws to me with this system. Alright, well, on to the Union side of the turn. And as we move to the 620 turn, and now what's going to be triggered here is Hubbard, Hill, Lynch, and Moore. I think those are all in play. Hubbard was just triggered. He was within 5 in line of sight, so he threw himself in here, and you can see he kind of repulsed Burns's units, along with Lynch doing the same there. And they kind of pushed the Confederates back off the hill. Up here, these guns were abandoned. But the Confederates were pinned, so they won't be able to advance in and just take them, which is, well, without using other units. The units that were sitting there right outside of them aren't going to be able to. You can see Dwight started to pull back. He actually tried to stretch a safer line here. This is gone. But more units got driven back. So this guy's kind of stuck hanging out there, and he's probably going to suffer for that. Elsewhere, the line kind of fell back here even further. We're seeing the Union, you know, falling up the hill and into the woods here. And this is kind of cut off. This just, these guys are in less defensive position than the woods that the Confederates are in, so that's kind of a disadvantage there. But the whole attack over here seems to be not quite working, even though that's the weakest point in the Union line. And you can kind of see where the line's kind of, deforming. And this may not be feasible, but, with just one unit able to fire on you, it's not that bad, actually. All right, well, we'll push into that next turn. Well, we pushed to the Union side of the turn, and you can see the Confederates chased away Dwight's unit that was left out there. They kind of punched forward here. You can see some melee going on. They shoved this poor guy they had enfilade out of the way. They're starting to clear the gully. Up here, they took those guns. They managed to slip in front, took some heavy fire, but they were okay. And now they're positioned against another set of guns. So they're kind of slicing in from the rear here while the main force is trying to connect over there. It's hard to tell who's winning, though. Confederates Bagby and Burns's somewhat larger brigades are both wrecked. The Union's not lost anything yet, but Lynch is in trouble, as you can see, and some of the others are getting pretty hammered. It's tough. It's tough to see, but anyway, we got our new leader for Burns here on the board. We got some poor independents running away. I had this guy on top, but he just gives them a +1 or a -1, or however you want to look at it. Slight bonus to rallying. He can't auto rally them in this scenario. One thing that's kind of interesting, this one, because they added the prolong rules, you can't just slide guns up and unlimber them in front of the enemy without taking some fire. Well, small arms fire. But the Confederates went ahead and tried anyway, and it worked out okay. It's a risky proposition, but they needed those guns there. They needed to pin things down so that they could grab those guns before the Union gun crew came up and remanned them. So it was, it didn't pin their guns or anything, but it did give them a little bit more power, and it gives them some more strength towards pushing this aside. You can see they're making their way up towards Pleasant Hill, but here's the problem. They can't just keep pushing with this flank. I mean, that's going to break apart. They've got a certain defensive structure there. It's pretty much stretched as far as it can go until we start bringing something up here. We might be able to shift the line a little bit, like 1 unit per hex, and that might be what we have to do to extend there. I don't know, we'll see. Alright, as we finish up the Union turn and move into 640 turn. Dwight's pulled back. They left their routed unit back here. He was pinned, so he couldn't get away. He couldn't rally. He's just stuck out there and in a lot of trouble. But otherwise, we pulled back to help solidify. We shifted out of the trench and into this kind of solid line along here. Basically, defending up this far front was just causing nothing but problems. Now, that means we can't create a solid line here that we kind of wanted to, but we're getting the terrain benefit. This game's kind of weird. I think the way that, well, not really. It's just the way the map looks. Over here, this gun did some real journeyman work here, along with the guy on top of it. Fired at this gun, knocked out a gun. This is actually not got a crew. I gotta put a marker on there. This one is at half crew. And, overall the Union position's a little bit more solid. I'm assuming this is going to fall apart one way or another, and I'm going to lose those guns, but the biggest worry right now is kind of right here at the center, where the heaviest impact of the Confederates is, and we've driven a couple of them routing away. That'll take a lot of the pressure off right now. And we got better terrain there at this point. We've been falling back through the woods. Now that we've hit the hill, well, it's about equivalent to the woods, really. But the wooded hill is a bonus. The danger over here, I'm hoping to stretch along the streamline maybe, or whatever, I don't know. That's really the risk here, is do I have to collapse this front? And there's no reason not to. This side is no particular a great advantage to me. There's no victory point space in there. But there is one up here, and there is one here. And these are the biggies that I think the Confederates have to take. If they can take Pleasant Hill itself, they're going to win. If they can't take at least half of it, I don't think they can. Alright, let's send this one up. And I wanted to note one thing actually before I do that. I've run really deep into my P Ridge counters for 1 and 2 counters. Not a terribly big deal. Most gamers are going, at least who pick up something like this, are going to have a bunch of numerical counters they can scrounge from somewhere. But the game definitely does not come with enough, at least of the low value ones. You can see I got a lot of 3s and 4s. I think they kind of misproportioned what you're liable to use. It's hard to tell, and I wouldn't expect them to necessarily get that perfectly right. But this is much, much worse of a factor of that. Wilson's Creek, another magazine game that I did recently in the same series, had something of a problem of this nature where I had to pull some counters out of Terrible Swift Sword. In this case, it's kind of cool because these counters are from the TSR edition, but it's very identifiable, the ones that I pull from the old SPI games, because they're much cooler, better matte counters.